After e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and knight c3, the three knights game is on the board. We go on with f5. So in this video, we're going to explore things that we haven't seen so far. Let's start with d3. This is a little bit more passive, but it's very solid. We go on with knight f6. And now we're going to look mainly at two options. One of them being bishop g5, the only square where it makes sense to develop the bishop. Bishop e3 is never really a thing in this type of openings because you can play d5 straight away, and now the threat of d4 is immediate, and the only thing to do for the white player that makes sense is to take this pawn, but then you can take back with the knight, and black is just already developing better than white. It doesn't mean like the black player is completely winning or anything, not at all, but bishop e3 is a bad move. Bishop g5 would make sense, or a3. a3 is there to stop bishop b4, which, as you know, is one of the crucial moves to play against the three knights, if you're a Gothic Gambit player. Let's start with bishop g5, pinning our knight. Okay, bishop b4 comes now, so if your opponent doesn't play a3, you have a chance to play bishop b4, you are going to take this knight no matter what, and because of the extra pressure on e5 or e4 that you are holding because of your f5 pawn, you should be able to double up and isolate the c pawn. That's one of the themes. Two options now before we change line. One of them is bishop developing and see what happens. The other one is bishop taking our knight first. Let's see, if white goes on with development, right? What's our idea? We take this pawn because our opponent will take back and then d6. And that's it. We have isolated. We take this knight. We're going to isolate and double up these two pawns. Now you might argue our opponent might decide to play bishop to d2 or queen to d2. And then in that case, we're not going to be able to double up the pawns. But let's say queen to d2 is not possible because knight e4. And now you have a lot of attack over this knight. The opponent queen will have to move, but if she moves to c1, for example, you can take this knight as well. I mean, it depends on how the game goes. So let's say the queen goes to c1, or maybe to e3. If queen goes to e3, you take the bishop. And you're up as a central pawn, very important pawn, no compensation. In this position, if queen goes to c1, to keep an eye on this bishop, because you got double attack on it, and the white player will have to defend it twice, obviously, you can take this knight, surprisingly, because now the bishop takes your queen, but now you take this pawn, it's checked with the bishop, the knight's attacking the queen, and your knight is not getting trapped. So after c3, you take the queen back, obviously, you get your bishop taken. Now you can take this one, and then you can take the other bishop. Anyway, you're winning material. So in this position, we mentioned how we played d6, right? You might argue, okay, what if queen d3 so that the knight doesn't really attack the queen? Now here, we take this knight, and we are gonna, no matter what, we're gonna double up and isolate these c pawns. If the queen takes, now you can take in e4. And you don't worry about being this, losing the queen, because you can take back. And then you can recapture this bishop. If our opponent takes a pawn, looks like, now it's attacking another pawn and then another pawn. But now you're going to take this bishop first, right? King takes back. And king to d7 traps the opponent bishop. So back in this position, we played d6. We realized that we're still threatening our attack on c3. Let's go on. Castle. In this way, the knight is unpinned. Now we are forced to take. Pawn takes back. h6, attacking the bishop. If bishop takes, we happily take back with the queen, and we have zero weaknesses. If bishop goes back, okay, g5, bishop g3, and now queen e7. Now here, there's an attack on this pawn. We want to take it for real. So if white plays rook to b1, for example, knight to e4 is just a free pawn. There is no compensation. If white plays bishop to d3, bishop to d7 comes, and after rook to b1, long castle, you're doing just fine. White has the bishop pair, but the center is pretty stupid, and it's not very open. And besides, we can basically play knight h5 and take this bishop anytime we want. So let's look at this move. Knight d2 now, h2. We're attacking the opponent bishop. This is the thematic way to continue. And now here, h3. If white plays h4, it looks like it's blocking the arrival of our pawn into the opponent territory, but in reality, black goes on with the usual plan, rook d to g8, and we're going to open the file. So let's continue from h3 actually instead of h4. h3, you attack the bishop. The bishop will have to move to h2, and now g4. You see how it's all unstoppable. Takes. Let's only play best moves now by your opponent in faulty variation, but still. Bishop to e2, putting double attack over that knight will reinforce the defense. And now swapping everything will just be favorable for us. But there's nothing else to be done. f3 will be met with knight going to make a fork. If white plays f4, okay, well, same thing, knight e3, queen moves. And now the best move is pawn takes back in f4. White takes, let's say, it looks like white can just play rook f4, saving the rook and saving everything, but you just take in g2 now and it's completely game over. You have all the tactics of the world. So in this position, after f4 and pawn takes in f4, if white plays rook to f2, reinforcing the defense over g2 and saving the rook like that, you play h3. Can't push the pawn because he will make a fork. So it's this and this, that's it. So back in this position, if white tries to calm down our initiative by simply taking and say, you know what, let's swap everything and see if I can reduce the initiative. Rook takes back, and now f3 attacking the rook, rook to g6. The rook is on light square, doesn't have to worry about any attack of the opponent bishop or anything else. Rook f2, defending this pawn more, preparing to double up the rooks. Okay, we push the other rook into the same open file, we have a lot of attack. So knight to c4 now, potentially going to e3, f5, d5, very desirable looking squares. Too late anyway. Bishop to h3 comes, and after knight to e3, defending g2 a little bit further, doesn't matter, you're gonna take anyway. Knight takes, and now h3. Okay, so let's take it from the start, and go once again through the line of d3. So here's the 3 knights, and then f5, d3, and knight f6. We're looking at bishop g5. When bishop g5 comes, you immediately play bishop b4. You're gonna have to go for this, let's call it tactic. White to move now. What if white takes our knight, reducing our attack over the square e4? This is perfectly reasonable. Okay, anyway, in this case we have to remember that our opponent deprived himself of the bishop pair. So after pawn takes in f5, our opponent now no longer has to worry about the usual tactic. You know, when we want to take this pawn, pawn takes back, bishop takes, pawn takes, and then white will have to play like that for the rest of the game. So here, white takes in f5. Okay, we go on with queen takes f5. And after bishop takes, so this is the best variation by black, by the way. d5. Castle, bishop to e6. Defending this position is important because, as you notice here, we are not taking the knight. Of course, you're not going to be a brain-dead chess player that just does moves like trying to remember from some videos that you've watched, but rather you need to listen to the reasons why a move is played and connect with that. Of course, I'm not going to take this knight. It doesn't make sense to do so because pawn takes back. There is no isolated pawns. These 3 pawns are actually looking really good, and I lost the bishop pair for absolutely no reason whatsoever. So this is not the case. Our opponent gave us the bishop pair at the beginning of the game, which gave us an opportunity to preserve ours and go on to a better endgame. a6, for instance, attacking a bishop, bishop e7. And now let's look at 2 options. Let's start from b4. It's a thematic move. Obviously, our opponent castled this side, and he's going to push the pawns on the queen side because he's thinking we might castle that side. Whatever. Bishop f6. Attacking a very strong diagonal. This is very important. So let's make an example. If, I don't know. Let's make 2 options. Knight to d2. Potential idea of pushing f4 and having the rook attacking this file. Castle. b5. You don't have to worry about this. It looks annoying, but in reality, just move the knight to d4. You're doing fine. a4. Okay, queen to g5. And we're going for the usual attacks, you know, bishop h3 and so on. Our knight is crucially attacking f3. It's not like we actually have that attack yet, but then we're going to have e4 as well to misplace the defender in f3. So after king h1 move that makes perfect sense, you play e4. This is how you're going to be playing this game. Rook to h2 is the best move. Because obviously we're threatening knight takes, the bishop's attacking the rook. It's difficult. Bishop e5 comes. Do you see how we are now aligning our pieces? The bishop are in the center. Look how strong it's getting. Okay, a5. King b8. It's crazy, and you know, when these pawns are coming towards your king and the computer just plays king to b8. Completely careless. Why? Because this is a minority. These two pawns are not going anywhere against these three. It can be annoying, and one of these pawns might remain quite advanced, and then at the end of all the trades in the game, your opponent might have a dangerous passed pawn, but this is nothing to worry about now. Pawn takes in e4. Now we take here. Knight takes back, because there's an attack on the knight, so we recapture, and now the knight is pinned. This is a great move. c4. Queen h5, going for mate. h3. Bishop to g4 comes now. There's double attack on the knight in e2. The pawn in h3 is pinned. Obviously here you might think, okay, well, f3. No, you can just take it. The knight is pinned. Remember, he's going to have to take the pawn, but then you can just take everything. Okay, you might argue, what about knight g3? Counter-attacking on the queen. It's fine. You just take the queen, and when they take your queen, you can take back. And here, back in this position, after playing the bishop back to e7, another thing that has to be mentioned is that, obviously, there's an e4 thematic move. So let's say b4, as we saw before, and bishop to f6. Here, we went to knight d2 earlier on. We didn't mention rook to b1. Knight d2 was good because he was putting more defense over the pawn in e4, but in this case you just play e4. He's got the attack on the knight and attack on the other knight. You're winning material. And also, in this position, earlier you might argue, okay, what if instead of b4, white just plays a normal developing move, queen d2, okay, you long castle. And the attack here on the queen side by these pawns is never really going to happen, because b4 now is punished. e4. There's an attack on this knight. The knight will have to move, but then you can take it. So the position is just fantastic. If takes, then take back. There's an attack. There's a discovered attack on the queen, attack on the knight. So let's go from the start. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, knight c3, f5, and now d3, the solid move. Knight f6. Well, let's not go through bishop g5 now. Let's go through the early a3. This is really annoying to me, and it's one of the best replies, actually, because a strong white player will know that bishop e4 should not be allowed. Okay, here we go on with bishop e7. No reason to mess around too much. You don't want to play bishop c5 because then knight a4 is attacking the bishop again. So bishop e7, bishop e2, castle, castle. The most boring game you can imagine. d6. The idea here after playing d6, considering that our opponent has, every time you see this white light square bishop locked into the pawns, so basically when the bishop doesn't play the typical Italian move or Spanish move, you know, bishop c4, bishop e5, the normal moves. When the bishop is locked in there, you want to play this move, okay, because then you also can play h6, g5, g4. Not that it necessarily has to happen, but it's one of the ideas. And this now penalizes the white player a lot, because white might think of playing g3, for instance, to reduce the pressure and the control that we have with the pawns, but then this will give weak light squares. So that's the move I want to play, but we needed to play d6 first. So d6. So let's look at this move now. b4. How do we react to this? This is annoying now, because when the pawn pushes, then we go to d4. Our opponent might take everything and gain more space in the center. So black plays a6 to stop that from happening. Bishop to b2. Let's react to this. Okay, king h8. And now let's look at this idea. Knight e5, making this bishop stronger and attacking our bishop pair, trying to look for a swap. Also because knight takes and then pawn takes back will be favorable, as we said before, because our player, the white player, wants to play a move like b5 to attack this knight, or pawn takes in d5 to attack this knight, because he wants to misplace our knight. He wants our knight to go to d4 and then take it. So we had to play a6 to stop that from happening. And now what to do. We take in e4. This is the best move. So here the pawn cannot be taken back because then you can take the pawn for free. There's no compensation. Bishop d3 attacking the knight. Knight back to f6. There is nothing. c4, for instance. Bishop to g4. You pin the opponent knight. h3, you keep the pin. If the queen were to go away, don't hesitate. Just take the knight and break and isolate the pawn structure in front of our opponent. He's got nothing. If instead white plays g4 first, bishop to f7, doubles the attack on this knight. So after knight takes a bishop pair, fine, take back with the queen. And now let's go on and see how this endgame will look like. Remember, we couldn't go to d4 because our opponent will be happy to take. So let's look at this move, knight to h2. The idea is to push f4 eventually, especially because we don't have the darks for bishop anymore. d5. Take, take. And after bishop c4, knight f4. See how you play in this endgame. Bishop takes f7, obviously because we got an attack on the bishop will have to move again, but we also have an attack on h3. So after bishop takes, first we take in h3. King moves, check again. King moves, and now we recapture, we're completely winning. Queen f3, rook a to e8, rook moves. But look, we're up 2 pawns already. Position evaluated -5 or something like that. The queen now goes to g6 is our best move. The idea is to play a move like d3, knight to d3, it's completely game over. So in this position, as we said, we take the pawn. What happens if our opponent takes our bishop immediately? Okay, we ignore it for the moment, you take in f3. So we're equal in material, but we are going to recapture the piece. So we're going to be up a piece. If the bishop takes, then you can take the free knight. If knight takes the knight with an attack on our queen, we take the bishop, we're equal. But what we're threatening is, well, now we're threatening the queen, we're still threatening the knight. If the knight takes our queen, we can take the opponent queen, obviously with promotion, which will force our opponent to take. Or play knight f7 with check, but then you can still take. So like take, take, and you're up a piece. And last but not least, in this position, when we take the pawn in e4, what if our knight, the opponent knight takes our knight? Same thing. You take here, and you've got these pieces hanging, so you're winning material.